My wife cheated with my cousin, then asked to keep our house. I never thought I'd be writing this story, but here I am at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, trying to make sense of what happened to my life. 6 months ago, I was happily married, living in our dream house that we'd spent 3 years saving for. Today, I'm sitting in a studio apartment that smells like old cigarettes, wondering how everything went so wrong so fast. It started on a Tuesday evening when I came home early from work. I had planned to surprise my wife with dinner from her favorite restaurant. The house was unusually quiet, and her car wasn't in the driveway, which was strange because she usually got home before me. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Something felt off, but I brushed it aside and decided to wait for her to come home. When she finally walked through the door 2 hours later, her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, and she had this guilty look that I'd never seen before. She mumbled something about traffic and rushed upstairs to shower. I followed her, trying to start a conversation, but she locked the bathroom door behind her. In 7 years of marriage, she had never locked that door. My stomach started churning with a feeling I couldn't quite name. Over the next few weeks, her behavior became increasingly erratic. She would disappear for hours without explanation, claiming she was running errands or visiting her sister. Her phone was always face down, and she'd jump whenever it buzzed. The woman who used to share every detail of her day with me suddenly became secretive and distant. Our conversations became shallow, and she avoided eye contact during dinner. I tried to convince myself that maybe she was planning something special for our anniversary, or perhaps she was dealing with work stress. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The way she flinched when I touched her, the way she'd stay up late on her laptop after I went to bed, the way she'd suddenly become interested in going to the gym every evening, it all pointed to something I didn't want to believe. My cousins started acting strange around me during family gatherings. The first red flag should have been obvious, but I was too trusting to see it. My cousin had always been the charming one in the family, the guy who could make anyone laugh at parties. He'd been coming around more often lately, sometimes dropping by when I wasn't home to help my wife with various household projects. She'd mentioned casually that he'd fixed the leaky faucet or helped her move furniture, and I was grateful for his help. But something shifted during my mom's birthday party last month. He couldn't look me in the eye, kept checking his phone, and seemed nervous around me for the first time in our lives. When I tried to talk to him about sports or work, he'd give short answers and find excuses to walk away. My wife, meanwhile, was acting overly cheerful, laughing too loud at his jokes and finding reasons to be in the same room as him. I caught them whispering in the kitchen while I was getting drinks for everyone. When I approached, they quickly stepped apart, and my wife started talking about the weather with fake enthusiasm. My cousin excused himself and left the party early, claiming he had to work the next day. The whole interaction felt wrong, like I was watching a badly acted play where everyone knew their lines except me. That night, I asked my wife directly if something was bothering her. She looked at me with those eyes I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago and told me I was being paranoid. She said stress from work was making me imagine things that weren't there. I wanted to believe her so badly that I convinced myself she was right. I apologized for being suspicious and promised to trust her more. But the seed of doubt had been planted. I started noticing small things that I'd previously ignored. The way she'd smile at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. The new clothes she'd bought but never wore around me. The fact that she'd started working out and suddenly cared about her appearance in a way she hadn't since we first started dating. I found text messages that shattered my world completely. 3 weeks later, my wife left her phone on the kitchen counter while she took a shower. It buzzed with a text message, and without thinking, I glanced at the screen. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was from my cousin, and the message preview showed words that no husband should ever see about his wife. My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone, knowing I was about to cross a line I'd never crossed before. The conversation thread was filled with messages that made me physically sick. They'd been meeting at hotels, planning their encounters around my work schedule, and worst of all, they'd been doing this for months. The messages were explicit, intimate, and filled with declarations of love that she'd never given me. They talked about me like I was an obstacle to their happiness, a problem to be managed until they figured out their next move. I read message after message, each one feeling like a knife to my chest. They discussed how guilty they felt but couldn't stop seeing each other. They talked about how their feelings had developed gradually, starting as friendship and evolving into something they claimed was real love. My cousin wrote about how he'd always been attracted to her but never acted on it until recently. My wife responded with messages about how she'd been unhappy in our marriage for years, but didn't know how to leave. The most devastating part was reading about specific moments I remembered from our recent past. The night she claimed to be at her sister's house, she was actually with him at a hotel downtown. The weekend she said she needed space to think about our relationship. She'd spent it at his apartment. Every lie, every excuse, every moment of fake affection was laid bare in those messages. I sat on our kitchen floor, surrounded by the life we'd built together, reading about how my wife and cousin planned to be together once they figured out how to handle the family situation. They called me names, made fun of my habits, and discussed intimate details about our marriage that she had no right to share. The woman I'd trusted with my deepest secrets had been betraying me in the worst possible way. My brother discovered the truth and confronted them both. I couldn't handle this alone anymore. The weight of what I'd discovered was crushing me, and I needed someone to talk to who would understand the family dynamics involved. My brother had always been my closest confidant, the one person I could trust with anything. When I called him that night, barely able to speak through my tears, he dropped everything and came over immediately. I showed him the messages, and I watched his face go through the same progression of emotions I'd experienced. Shock, anger, disgust, and finally, a cold determination to do something about it. He'd never liked my cousin much, always said there was something fake about his charm. Now he felt vindicated in his instincts, but there was no satisfaction in being right about something so horrible. My brother convinced me that we needed to gather more evidence before confronting anyone. He helped me install monitoring software on our home computer and set up a camera in our bedroom. I hated doing it, hated becoming the kind of person who spied on his wife, but I needed proof of what was happening in my own home. The thought that they might have been together in our bed made me sick to my stomach. 2 days later, while I was supposedly at work, my brother watched from his car as my cousin entered our house. The camera captured everything. They were in my bedroom on my side of the bed, acting out the fantasies they'd been texting about. My brother called me at work, and I had to excuse myself to throw up in the bathroom. The woman I'd loved for 8 years was with my cousin in the space where we talked about having children someday. That evening, my brother and I confronted them together. We waited until my cousin's car was in the driveway, then walked in through the front door. They were sitting on our couch, watching a movie like they were a normal couple. The look of terror on their faces when they saw us would have been satisfying if I hadn't been so destroyed by the whole situation. My brother did most of the talking because I couldn't form coherent sentences. He laid out everything we knew, showed them the screenshots I'd taken, and told them exactly what he thought of their betrayal. My cousin tried to deny it at first, then switched to justifying their actions, claiming they couldn't help falling in love. My wife sat there crying, apologizing over and over, begging me to listen to her explanation. She actually had the nerve to ask for the house after everything. The confrontation lasted 3 hours, and by the end I was emotionally drained. My cousin finally left, tail between his legs, promising to stay away from our family gatherings. My wife and I were alone for the first time since I'd discovered the truth, and I thought maybe we could have an honest conversation about what happened and what came next. But instead of taking responsibility or begging for forgiveness, she started making demands. She said she needed time to think about what she wanted, that she wasn't sure if she wanted to save our marriage or pursue things with my cousin. She talked about how she'd been unhappy for years, how I'd taken her for granted, how she deserved to be with someone who made her feel alive again. Then came the request that nearly broke me completely. She asked if she could stay in the house while we figured things out. She said it wasn't fair for her to have to leave the home she'd helped create, that she had rights as my wife, that I should be the one to find somewhere else to live temporarily. She suggested I could stay with my brother while she decided what she wanted to do with her life. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman who had been cheating on me with my cousin for months was asking me to leave my own home, so she could be comfortable while deciding whether to stay married to me or run off with my family member. She spoke about it like it was a reasonable request, like I should be understanding of her need for space and time to process her feelings. When I refused, she became angry. She accused me of being selfish and vindictive, said I was trying to punish her for being honest about her feelings. She claimed that kicking her out would be cruel, that she had nowhere else to go, that her salary wasn't enough to afford a place of her own right away. She even suggested that since I made more money, I should be the one to bear the financial burden of our separation. The audacity of her requests was staggering. She wanted to keep the house, keep her affair partner in her life, and have me subsidize her new lifestyle. She talked about how we could handle the divorce amicably, how we could remain friends, how she hoped I'd eventually understand that she was just following her heart. My father got involved and everything exploded at the family level. I thought I could handle this situation quietly, keep it between us and maybe my brother, but my father has always been perceptive about family dynamics. He noticed that my cousin had stopped coming to family events and that I looked like I'd aged 10 years in a few weeks. When he cornered me at my nephew's birthday party, demanding to know what was wrong, I couldn't lie anymore. My father's reaction was volcanic. He'd helped us with the down payment for our house, had welcomed my wife into the family like she was his own daughter, and had always treated my cousin like a son. The betrayal hit him on multiple levels, not just as my father, but as someone who had invested emotionally and financially in our lives. He started making phone calls immediately, rallying other family members to support me. Within hours, the entire extended family knew what had happened. My uncles called to express their disgust with my cousin's behavior. My aunts reached out to my wife, some to scold her, others to try to talk sense into her. My grandmother, who had always been my cousin's biggest supporter, was so disappointed that she refused to speak to him when he tried to call and explain himself. The family pressure was intense, but it also backfired in unexpected ways. My cousin's parents defended him, claiming that love couldn't be helped and that sometimes these things just happened. They suggested that maybe my marriage had been in trouble anyway, that their son wasn't entirely to blame for the situation. This created a rift in the family that went beyond just my immediate problem. My wife felt attacked from all sides and became defensive rather than remorseful. She started telling people that I was turning the family against her, that I was being manipulative and cruel. She painted herself as the victim, claiming that she'd been trapped in an unhappy marriage and that my cousin was the first person who'd shown her real love in years. The situation spiraled out of control when my cousin's parents demanded a family meeting to discuss everything openly. They wanted to mediate between us, to find a solution that would keep the family together. My father refused, saying there was nothing to mediate about adultery and betrayal. The meeting happened anyway, but without my immediate family present, creating two camps within our extended family. My wife's sister revealed she had known about the affair. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get more complicated, my wife's sister called me. She'd been quiet during the whole drama, not taking sides publicly, but apparently she'd been carrying a huge secret. She asked to meet me for coffee, saying she had something important to tell me that might change how I viewed the situation. When we sat down, she looked nervous and guilty. She confessed that she'd known about the affair for 2 months before I discovered it. My wife had confided in her, sworn her to secrecy, and begged her not to tell me. She'd been torn between loyalty to her sister and doing what was right, and she'd chosen to stay silent, hoping the affair would end on its own. She told me details that made the betrayal even worse. My wife had been planning to leave me for months, had been saving money in a secret account, and had been consulting with a lawyer about divorce proceedings. The affair with my cousin wasn't a sudden mistake or a moment of weakness. It was part of a calculated plan to transition from our marriage to a new relationship. My wife's sister revealed that they'd been meeting regularly at her apartment, that she'd been covering for them by providing alibis when needed. She'd watched them together, seen how happy they were, and had started to believe that maybe they were meant to be together. But seeing the devastation it had caused me and our family made her realize she'd been complicit in something terrible. She also told me about conversations where my wife had discussed keeping the house, claiming she deserved it because she'd contributed to the mortgage payments and had helped with the renovations. My wife had been strategizing about the divorce settlement, talking about how she could maximize her share of our assets while minimizing the disruption to her new relationship. The revelation that my wife's sister had been helping them was devastating, but it also gave me crucial information about my wife's intentions. She wasn't conflicted about our marriage, she'd already decided to leave. She wasn't unsure about her feelings for my cousin, she'd been planning a future with him. All her talk about needing time to think was just manipulation to buy herself more time to prepare for the divorce. My cousin showed up at my work with a shocking proposal. 3 weeks after the family confrontation, my cousin appeared at my office building. I was leaving for lunch when I saw him waiting by my car, looking nervous and desperate. My first instinct was to walk away, but something about his posture made me stop. He looked like he'd been sleeping badly, had lost weight, and seemed genuinely distressed about something. He started talking quickly, like he'd rehearsed what he was going to say. He told me he loved my wife, that what they had was real, and that he wanted to do right by everyone involved. Then he made a proposal that left me speechless. He offered to buy my half of the house, to take over the mortgage payments, and to essentially buy me out of my own home so that he and my wife could live there together. He explained that he'd been researching the legal aspects of our situation, that he knew I could force the sale of the house in a divorce, but that he wanted to avoid that complication. He'd calculated what my equity in the house was worth and was prepared to pay me that amount plus an additional sum for my inconvenience. He presented it like a business transaction, like we were negotiating a real estate deal rather than discussing the destruction of my marriage. What made the proposal even more surreal was his attitude. He seemed to think he was being generous and fair, that he was offering me a good deal that would benefit everyone. He talked about how this way I could start fresh with a significant amount of money, how I wouldn't have to deal with the stress of a contested divorce, and how we could all move on with our lives more quickly. He assured me that he would take good care of the house, that he understood how much work I'd put into it, and that he'd honor the improvements I'd made. He even offered to let me come back and get any remaining personal items I might want, as if he was doing me a favor by allowing me access to my own belongings. The conversation lasted about 20 minutes, and through it all, I kept waiting for him to express some remorse or acknowledge the pain he'd caused. Instead, he talked about practical matters, financial arrangements, and timeline considerations. He seemed to view the whole situation as an unfortunate complication that could be resolved through proper planning and fair compensation. When I finally found my voice, I told him I needed time to think about his proposal. He seemed pleased, like he'd expected me to reject it immediately, and he gave me his new phone number, saying he'd wait to hear from me. As he walked away, I realized that he genuinely believed he was being reasonable, and that I should appreciate his willingness to make things easier for everyone involved. I discovered my wife had been stealing money from our joint account. While I was processing my cousin's bizarre proposal, I decided to review our financial situation more carefully. I'd been so focused on the emotional betrayal that I hadn't paid much attention to our money, but something my wife's sister had said about a secret account made me suspicious. I started going through our bank statements, credit card bills, and other financial records with more scrutiny. What I found was another layer of betrayal that I hadn't expected. Over the past 4 months, my wife had been making cash withdrawals from our joint account, usually small amounts that wouldn't attract attention individually, but added up to several $1,000s total. She'd also been using our credit cards for expenses that didn't make sense, hotel rooms on days when she claimed to be visiting her sister, restaurant bills for 2 people when she said she was eating alone, and shopping purchases that I'd never seen her bring home. I tracked down receipts and discovered that she'd been funding her affair with our shared money. The hotels where she met my cousin, the dinners they shared, the gifts she bought for him, everything was paid for with money from our joint account. She'd been stealing from me to finance her betrayal, using our savings to create memories with another man. The financial investigation revealed even more disturbing details. She'd opened a credit card in her name only, using our home address, and had been making purchases that I never saw. When I called the credit card company, they told me she'd listed herself as single on the application, claiming she had no spouse and no shared financial obligations. She'd been preparing for divorce while still married to me, building up debt that would become part of our shared financial responsibility. I also discovered that she'd been transferring money to a savings account I didn't know about. She'd been systematically moving funds from our joint account to this secret account, building up what appeared to be an escape fund. The account had been open for 6 months, starting around the time her affair began, and contained almost $10,000 that she'd diverted from our shared finances. The paper trail showed a level of premeditation that was staggering. She hadn't just cheated on me emotionally and physically, she'd been stealing from me financially to support her double life. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every secret purchase was evidence of her deliberate deception. She'd been planning her exit strategy while still sleeping next to me every night, still telling me she loved me, still making plans for our future together. When I confronted her with the evidence, she initially denied everything, then claimed she'd been saving money for a surprise vacation for us. When I showed her the hotel receipts and restaurant bills, she broke down and admitted to using our money for her affair. She said she'd always planned to pay it back, that she'd been afraid to use her own money in case I noticed her spending patterns. The final confrontation revealed her true nature and ended everything. Armed with evidence of her financial betrayal and my cousin's insulting proposal, I decided it was time to end this nightmare once and for all. I arranged to meet my wife at our house for what I told her would be a final discussion about our future. She arrived looking hopeful, probably thinking I was ready to consider her request to keep the house or maybe even work on our marriage. I laid out everything I discovered about her secret spending, the hidden account, and the credit card fraud. I showed her the documented evidence of her theft and explained how her actions constituted financial abuse. She tried to minimize it, claiming the amounts were small and that she'd intended to tell me eventually, but I cut her off and told her about my cousin's visit to my office. When I repeated his proposal about buying the house, her face lit up with excitement. She actually clapped her hands together and said it was perfect, that it would solve all our problems. She started talking about how generous he was being, how this would give me a fresh start, and how we could all move forward without any hard feelings. Her enthusiasm about the plan was the final confirmation I needed about where her loyalties truly lay. I told her calmly that I would never sell my house to the man who destroyed my marriage, that I would fight any attempt to force me out of my home, and that I was filing for divorce immediately. I explained that I'd already consulted with a lawyer, that I had evidence of her adultery and financial deception, and that I intended to pursue every legal remedy available to me. Her reaction was immediate and ugly. The mask of the loving wife who'd made mistakes finally slipped away completely, and I saw who she really was underneath. She screamed at me, called me vindictive and cruel, accused me of trying to ruin her life out of spite. She said I was being selfish by not accepting my cousin's generous offer, that I was choosing revenge over everyone's happiness. She threatened to contest the divorce, to claim that I'd been abusive and controlling, to make the process as difficult and expensive as possible. She said she'd tell everyone that I'd driven her to cheat through my neglect and emotional unavailability. She promised to destroy my reputation in our community and to make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. But what shocked me most was when she started crying and begging me to reconsider. She said she loved me and my cousin equally, that she didn't want to choose between us, that maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement where she could be with both of us. She actually suggested that I could stay married to her while she maintained her relationship with my cousin, that we could all find a way to be happy together. When I told her that was insane, she accused me of being closed-minded and traditional, of not understanding that love didn't have to follow conventional rules. She said she'd been researching polyamory and that maybe our situation was just ahead of its time. She begged me to at least consider the possibility, to think about how we could make it work for everyone involved. I looked at this woman I'd loved for 8 years, the person I'd trusted with my heart and my future, and realized I didn't know her at all. The selfish, delusional person standing in front of me was not the woman I'd married. She was someone who could justify any behavior, rationalize any betrayal, and convince herself that her desires were more important than anyone else's feelings. I told her to pack her things and leave immediately, that I was changing the locks and that she was no longer welcome in my home. I informed her that all communication would go through lawyers from now on, that I never wanted to see her again, and that she'd made her choice when she decided to cheat with my cousin. As she gathered her belongings, still crying and pleading, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel: relief. The divorce proceedings took 8 months, and they were as ugly as she'd promised. She tried to claim half of everything, including the house, but the evidence of her adultery and financial deception worked in my favor. She ended up with much less than she'd hoped for, and my cousin's offer to buy the house became irrelevant when the court awarded it to me entirely. I still live in the house today, and I've made it truly mine by renovating every room they contaminated with their presence. My cousin was essentially exiled from family gatherings, and my ex-wife moved to another state with him shortly after the divorce was finalized. I heard through mutual friends that their relationship didn't survive the stress of the divorce proceedings and the family drama they'd created. Sometimes I wonder if I should have seen the signs earlier, if I could have saved myself months of pain by paying attention to the red flags. But mostly, I'm grateful that I discovered the truth before wasting more years of my life with someone who was capable of such elaborate deception. The woman who asked to keep our house after cheating with my cousin taught me that some people are capable of justifying anything when it serves their purposes, and that lesson, painful as it was, probably saved me from an even worse fate down the road.